Well, the word from members of the Ukrainian delegation was that they were hoping that an invitation to join NATO might even emerge from this summit. They got nothing of the sort. The word invitation was inserted into the communiqué. Some might feel a little cynically, but the communiqué does not constitute the issuing of an invitation in any sense. And President Zelenskyy got wind of this before he even set off to come here and tweeted out that he thought that his country wasn't being shown respect. And when he was speaking to a crowd in Vilnius in the last couple of hours, he said, is it too much to expect that NATO doesn't time waste? A little earlier, President Biden had been saying that the last thing NATO should do is show any splits, because that's what President Putin most wants. It's not hard to imagine what the mood in the American delegation is like tonight. And all of this is happening while NATO is on the agenda looking at, in these 2 days, very big stuff, consequential to Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but in its own way sort of separate and massive, going back to sort of Cold War style plans for deployments, bases, equipment, troops, all along the eastern flank of NATO, which has now moved to countries like this that used to be on the other side back in the Cold War. Massive cost implications of all of that, barely getting talked about here, but will ripple through into individual member countries in times to come. All of that overshadowed today by the question of when, if and how Ukraine gets these special protections of NATO membership. Even before they were called to order, NATO leaders were torn off a strip by President Zelenskyy, tweeting angrily as he started his journey to the summit that it was unprecedented and absurd to have no timetable for a membership invitation. He said for Russia this means motivation to continue its terror. Uncertainty is weakness. President Zelenskyy had hoped a summit in one of the Baltic republics would be just the place to make Ukraine's hope of future NATO membership an iron-cast certainty. NATO meets at this most important moment in its history in a former Soviet republic just 30 minutes' drive from Belarus, a Russian client state, pondering if, how and when it might extend NATO's border deep inside what Russia considers its own.
It's very important, actually. We have this NATO summit here very close to the Belarusian border, actually. It's like less than 50 kilometers to go.
Estonia's foreign minister says history teaches that countries who want to join NATO but haven't been allowed to can be sitting ducks for Russian aggression.
This is the most dangerous place for the neighboring country of Russia to sit in a NATO waiting room but not having any further plan. And we have witnessed it with the Georgia 2008 and also Ukraine aggression. The Russian aggressions against Ukraine started 2014. So we must stop it now. We must give the path, the way, the next steps and the process for Ukraine, inevitably that they will become a member of NATO.
Your Excellencies, for the family photo, we would invite you to look in the central camera for...
President Zelenskyy worries that America and others in NATO are dragging their feet, promising long-term assurances, guarantees, everything but nailed-on future NATO membership.
Ukraine will feel it is part of this family, and that we step by step have to make sure that Ukraine gets what it wants, which is the security guarantees and a long-term commitment. Thank you so much.
The summit had started with relief as President Erdogan dropped his objection to Sweden joining NATO. His brinkmanship may have extracted American military hardware. But this is a summit about a NATO that is boosting the frequency and intensity of its military exercises in Eastern Europe, returning after decades winding down such work to its original focus, repelling Russia. Before the fall of the Berlin Wall, NATO had well over 1 million troops based in theatre in Europe to push back any Russian advance. That shrank, and NATO members got involved in conflicts as far away as Afghanistan. In recent decades, NATO's not only expanded east as old Warsaw Pact countries seek NATO's defence from Russia, but it's also been building up forces again on its new eastern border, which could build up to a third of the size of the original Cold War numbers, now scattered across countries that never thought they'd join this club.
We kind of didn't ever think that it was necessary to join NATO. But now the Finnish people decided otherwise. The time has definitely changed, and I think also one illustration of that is Finland and Sweden applying for NATO membership. We also, well, Finland obviously, we have taken care of our own defence for a very long time, very, very seriously by ourselves, so to say. But times have changed.
Even the Swedish people who enjoyed really more than 200 years of neutrality, they understood they must become the full member of NATO to secure their future. So we must understand as well that we must push Russia back to Russia.
President Zelenskyy was cheered as he walked through Vilnius tonight, just as NATO leaders were publishing their new agreed words on Ukraine's desire to join NATO. They used the word invitation, which Ukraine had demanded, but didn't issue one.
We have for the first time invitation as part of the language, and we have for the first time removed the requirement for membership action plan. So this is a big step, never been stronger language from NATO on membership.
Slava Ukraini!
President Zelenskyy was welcomed by crowds in Vilnius tonight. Next, he will tell NATO leaders to their faces what he thinks of their new communiqué. Individual NATO members are lining up promises of military support and will be hoping that calms the Ukrainian president's anger.
Gary Gibbon reporting from Vilnius. Well, earlier I spoke to Alina Frolova, who is Ukraine's Deputy Defense Minister, and I started by asking her if she shares President Zelenskyy's frustration about the language coming out of the NATO summit.
Well, in some way, yes and no, because we do understand that some partners from NATO countries, they still have not clear understanding of Ukrainian position and benefits which Ukraine can bring to NATO. And I think they still overestimate Russia in their capabilities.
Who are they, Alina? Who are these partners?
Based on what we know, this is United States and Germany. Right. And I think it's stipulated by their fears of Russian escalation or whatever it is.
But these are understandable fears, aren't they? Because we don't really know what goes on in the mind of Vladimir Putin. We know that he's made nuclear threats and he's got a lot of nuclear weapons at his disposal.
We don't know how much of these nuclear weapons he really has, because we saw for the last year that many of declared capabilities were not working properly or were just maximized by Russians. However, if we speak about the tactical nuclear weapons, we do understand that use of it won't change the course of war. I mean that it won't influence on the military operation, but at the same time, it can provoke the reaction of the Western countries. So I don't think that he has so much space for movement with this position.
But the truth is also, is it not, that the closer you are to Ukraine, countries like Poland or the Baltic republics, the more existential this war is for you. And America is a long way away. There's a massive ocean between America and Europe.
Absolutely, yes. It also plays its role, because you see that the biggest supporters of Ukraine are principally those who are on eastern part of Europe or on Nordic countries who already faced the Russian aggressiveness, and they do understand clearly how it can go. However, I think that Americans were too, let's say, concentrated for the last year on Chinese threat, and they missed up the clear understanding of what's going on in Europe, which is a principal partner for them. And yes, it takes time to change the approach, but we're working on this on all levels.
How ironic is it, in your mind, that so much has been made of Sweden's membership of NATO, the Turks finally dropping their veto, and you're a country in the middle of a hot war, you need all the support you can get, and your membership has been kept in the waiting room?
Well, we did not expect that we will get membership on this NATO summit. What we did expect that we will hear the clear promise that after the end of the land operation, we will get this invitation to NATO. We didn't get it. For now, maybe the situation will change in some hours. But I think that this is just like a saying about some kind of lack of strategic thinking, because Ukraine has now the biggest army in Europe and the most strongest and the most capable, because we took so much real operations on the ground. And not to have this army inside the NATO, it's quite a strange decision.
I mean, there are many people in NATO who say, if we promise Ukraine accession to the club the day the hostilities end, that gives Russia an incentive to just carry on for as long as possible.
Russia can decide whatever they wish, but we have Ukraine, which became quite capable and decisive in this situation. And we have our Western partners who can provide more weapons and more equipment and therefore influence on the ended up of this war. I don't think that Russia can physically more prolong that they will prolong this war more than they can do it physically. Yes, so the limitation for them is not a political will. The limitation for them is capabilities they have.
Alina Frolova, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.